Hiya, this is Linda again. I hope you've had a nice week. And here is the literature lesson for this week. Okay, so this week we're going to look at famous English authors. Do you know any? Which do you know? So pause this for a couple of minutes to tell each other any famous English authors that you know. Okay, how many? How many do you know? Let's have a look at some now. Right, here are 5 famous English authors. Can you match the name and date to the picture? So pause the video and match the letters, name and date, to the pictures. Go. Okay, have you done it? Okay, so one of them is easy. The only woman in the top right here, that is Jane Austen, very famous woman writer. 1715 to 1817. So she lived a very long life. And she wrote a lot of books like Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma. They're very traditional books. They're mostly all about women's position in life and how women have to play the marriage game and what society expects of women. This one underneath Jane Austen, the very old-fashioned looking one, that is Geoffrey Chaucer, 1343 to 1400. Now he wrote a lot of poems, and this is looking at before the Middle Ages, so it's more old High English. The English is very different that he uses. Looking at the bottom, the one with the BBC microphone, that, of course, is George Orwell, and he wrote, what did he write? Animal Farm, which we have looked at and read. He also wrote many other political books like 1984, but he wrote it in 1948 about the future. So he was writing in the first half of last century. The one next to him with the short trousers on, a painting of William Shakespeare, also extremely famous. He lived from 1564 to 1616, not very long, but he is one of the most famous English playwrights, dramatists that have ever existed. And the left-hand side, bottom left, that is a picture of Charles Dickens, who lived in the Victorian times. This was the century before last, 1812 to 1870, and he wrote a huge amount of novels and is one of the most famous writers in our country. So these are just a few. There are many more, of course. And in today's lesson, we're going to just look at 2 of them, Dickens and Shakespeare. First of all, Charles Dickens. Now, mainly he is showing in his novels the poverty in Victorian Britain. So he's not interested in the rich people, he was interested in the normal people who are struggling to survive in Victorian Britain as industrialization was taking hold. We're going to have a look at one of his books. I think this book is the most accessible. It's called A Christmas Carol. And these are some of the themes in the book. The main character, the one in the picture, in his night hat by the fire, his name is Scrooge. And Scrooge now has come to mean a miserly person, someone who counts all their money and refuses to give money to anybody or to help anybody with money because they just want to count more and more and more. So the story is that there are 3 ghosts that come to him on the night of Christmas, the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas to come in the future. And these ghosts terrify him into changing. It's about poverty, and it's also about gratefulness. We need to be grateful for things. We need to share things. We need to help other people. Nice messages. Would you like to read that book? Or would you like to see a summary of it on YouTube? Okay, we're going to watch a summary of the book. And this is a very nice animation. I think you're going to like it. Or the story. One of Dickens. If you want, I'm sure you can find if you Google, and you'll be able to read more of it. Okay. I need to skip the ads here. Right, so this is an animated book summary. Enjoy the writing.
Rather than a novel. By comparison, the Eagles. Yet this very short book, with its moving message of forgiveness and redemption, is one of the most popular in the world. It has never been out of print since it was first published in London in 1843 and has been translated into many languages. As with other Dickens stories, A Christmas Carol called attention to the plight of the desperately poor in London, especially the children. It also had an influence on the way people in Britain and the United States celebrated Christmas right down to the present day. This short book consists of 5 chapters, which at the time were called staves. Stave 1. The story opens in London on Christmas Eve, 7 years to the day after the death of Ebenezer Scrooge's business partner, Jacob Marley. Scrooge himself is a selfish, bitter old man. His occupation is not clearly stated, but he seems to be a moneylender and is extremely punishing when it comes to having his clients pay back their loans. When 2 local merchants ask Scrooge for a donation to help the poor, he refuses to give them anything. Scrooge's bookkeeper, Bob Cratchit, is overworked and rudely treated. Scrooge will not allow him enough coal to keep the office warm in December, and only grudgingly gives the man a day off to spend Christmas with his family. That night, back at his own empty, dark, depressing home, Scrooge is visited by the ghost of Marley. The ghost has a terrible appearance, wrapped with enormous chains and dragging heavy lockboxes. The ghost of Marley explains that, "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it." Marley tells Scrooge that unless he changes his selfish ways, he too will end up just like Marley. Scrooge refuses to believe him, and so Marley tells him to expect visitations from 3 spirits before the night is over. In Stave 2, Scrooge awakens to the presence of the spirit of Christmas past, a glowing angelic figure robed in white. The spirit makes him revisit his earliest Christmases, when he was a boy left alone at boarding school over the holiday, a youth apprenticed to his jolly master, Mr. Fezziwig, and finally, a young man choosing wealth over love when his fiancée, Belle, returns his engagement ring because she believes he loves gold better than he loves her. Scrooge is quite distraught by what he has been forced to remember and demands to return to his room alone. In Stave 3, Scrooge again awakens to a ghost in his house, this time the spirit of Christmas present. He is an enormous and very jovial man who is surrounded by the most wonderful feast imaginable, along with a blazing hearth fire, a Christmas tree, and many gifts. The spirit shows Scrooge how others celebrate Christmas, including Scrooge's kind-hearted nephew, Fred, and Bob Cratchit, and his very poor but happy family. We meet Cratchit's sweet-natured young son, Tiny Tim, who is ill and crippled. The spirit informs Scrooge that if the boy cannot get a doctor's care, which of course his family cannot afford, he will die. The spirit also shows Scrooge 2 cold, starving, neglected children, and tells him their names are Ignorance and Want, for they have no one to care for them. Scrooge asks the ghost, "Have they no refuge or resource?" The spirit replies with Scrooge's own callous remarks, asking, "Are there no workhouses?" In Stave 4, the final visitor, the spirit of Christmas yet to come, is the most terrifying, for it is a mere specter in black and resembles the Grim Reaper. By now, Scrooge has been shaken by all that he has been forced to see, and the spirit does not hesitate to take advantage of his vulnerable state. Scrooge is shown that at his death, no one mourns for him, and that nearly everyone is simply glad that such cold-hearted man is finally gone. Even worse, he is shown that Tiny Tim has died, and the Cratchit family will never be the same. Scrooge realizes that his life has served little purpose, and indeed has only been a source of sorrow and misery to others. When the spirit forces him to look at his own cold and lonely gravestone, Scrooge allows his heart to change at last. In stave 5, Scrooge awakens in his room, and it is Christmas morning. Overjoyed at finding that it is not too late for him to change his ways and make a positive difference in the lives of his family, friends, and employees, he first takes gifts and good food to the Cratchit family. Then, for the first time, Scrooge accepts his nephew Fred's invitation to Christmas dinner. There is one fascinating aspect of this story which is re-explored every time it is read, performed on stage, or filmed for movies or television. Is Ebenezer Scrooge a bad man who finally becomes good, or was he actually a good man who went bad for a time and then became good again? Plays Scrooge will give it his own outlook. In the meantime, A Christmas Carol remains a classic which has spoken very clearly to every generation for close to 200 years.
Okay, did you like that? That's just a summary. Of course, you can read the book. It's called A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and it's a moral tale. Of course, it's not too long, it's not too complicated, and it's a really interesting way of documenting a change, a really important change in someone to understand humans and not be so mean. Lovely book. I'd recommend it. Charles Dickens also wrote many other books like Great Expectations, The Pickwick Papers, many other books that you can also read. But we're now going to go on to talk about William Shakespeare. Now, have a look at these pictures. These are the most beautiful theatre. Now, this is a theatre that was rebuilt about 15, 20 years ago, 25 years ago in London. And it was rebuilt to look exactly like the sort of theatre that William Shakespeare was writing his plays for. Now, it's a round theatre with seats all round it on a few different levels. And the stage is, if you look at the bottom picture in the corner, they have musicians. It's open to the weather. And this is in London, so often it rains and all the rain comes in the theatre. But the interesting place is in the bottom, where those people are, that is very, very cheap tickets. So that's where I always go when I go to this theatre. The seats cost, for example, £30, £40, £50, but it's only £5 to go in at the bottom and stand just like the people used to watch it. The poor people used to go in the bottom and the rich people used to sit watching at the sides. And this is a wonderful, wonderful theatre. They have different Shakespeare plays all summer. They don't open in the winter when it's too cold. If you ever have the chance to come to London, please go to this Globe Theatre. I'm going to take you there now to play you a little tiny bit of a YouTube recording of one of Shakespeare's most Romeo and Juliet, and they, well, one of kills themselves ever. Just watch this, the Globe Theatre.
Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage.
Okay, if you want to then Google that and you can find a lot more episodes from that. Beautiful, beautiful theatre. But the language that William Shakespeare wrote in is very old-fashioned and very difficult to understand sometimes. So it's very difficult to study. We're going to have a look at a few different bits in a minute. But first, a bit of background information. So William Shakespeare wrote 37 plays, which is a lot. It could have been more than 37. 3 different types: histories, comedies, and tragedies. The histories, for example, Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, Henry V, very famous plays. All the comedies, they end up with a marriage, like All's Well That Ends Well, Midsummer Night's Dream, and all the tragedies end with the death of the main character, like Romeo and Juliet, or Hamlet, or Macbeth. I'm sure you've heard of and maybe read some of these plays. Shakespeare also wrote a lot of poetry. He published 154 sonnets. And if you remember, in our first literature session, we looked at one or two of Shakespeare's sonnets. And he also acted. He was an actor in the theatre, just like that one, in the early 17th century. And he acted in many of his own plays. And the interesting thing was, at the time, women weren't allowed to be actors in theatres, so all the women parts had to be played by men. Very interesting. They play around with that concept now, and if you go to this Globe Theatre in the summer, sometimes they have all men groups acting the roles of women, and sometimes they have all women groups acting the roles of men as well. Very interesting and experimental. Okay, so this is Shakespearean England. It looked very different from how England looks today. All the towns obviously were much, much smaller, and the buildings were like this inn here, this public house made of wood, old buildings with thatched roofs. And you can still see the place where Shakespeare was born and lived, in a town called Stratford-on-Avon. Very, very different from 400 years later, where we are now. We're going to look at some famous quotations and look at the language of the literature. I'm going to read them aloud, and I want you to think of 2 things. What do they mean? And how is the language different to language now? Because over that 400 years, of course, the English language has changed a lot. Nobody can stop the language from changing. It's changing all the time. Let's see what it used to be like in Shakespeare's time. So the first one I'm going to read to you. This is from a play called As You Like It. And this is 2 screens. I'm going to read this to you because it's easier to understand if it's read rather than you reading it to yourself. Okay, so think about, what's it about? How is the language different? There might be some vocabulary that you don't understand, words that we don't use anymore. Okay, ready? All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances, and so he plays his part. The sixth age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side. His youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again towards childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all, that ends this strange eventful history, is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Okay, can you pause now and discuss with your partner, what does this mean, these two slides, and what language is different from the language, the English language in 2022? So have a look at this page, pause for a few minutes now to discuss. Okay. Now, some of this language is quite old-fashioned, like woeful ballad. It means a sad song. Strange oaths, an oath is like a promise. And then the second half, again, pause and discuss. What does it mean? And look at the language. Okay, so again, lots of quite old-fashioned language. I'm sure you noticed the bottom, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste. That sans is the word that comes from French, sans, but they pronounced it in an English way, meaning without. So with no teeth, with no eyes, with no taste. The English language, of course, borrowed a lot of words from French, and this one we don't use anymore in English. So what's it about, this long quotation from Shakespeare? I'm sure you found this, discovered this, because it's about the 7 ages of life. So all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. So the world is like a stage. Everyone in the world are just actors. They come on, they go off, and they play many parts in life. And so we have 7 ages of people: a baby, a school student, a lover, a soldier, and then a justice, like a lawyer, a bit older and fatter with a pouch on the side, getting older, and then his voice going and getting very childish. Second childishness, you become like a child at the end with no teeth, no eyes, no taste and nothing. Quite depressing, miserable about life, but very interesting and beautiful language. Okay, that's one famous part of a Shakespeare play. We're now going to look at one more. And this is also very famous. This is from the play Hamlet. So I'm going to read it. I want you to think, what does it mean? And how is the language different? Are you ready? To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coin must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Okay, so again, pause the screen, pause the video and talk to your partner. What does it mean? How is the language different? Okay, pause. Okay, so again, lots of language, which is very difficult. In the bold part there, perchance to dream. Perchance means maybe. I means yes. Devoutly, to be wished. 'Tis, it is. What does it mean? It's about, should I live or should I die? And this is Hamlet when he's trying to decide whether to kill himself or not. So it's a very, very big, momentous time of the play. He's thinking, comparing death to sleeping. Is it the same as sleeping? Nobody knows. Should he kill himself or carry on and suffer in life? Very famous quotation this is, and very beautiful language. But again, you can see it's quite difficult to understand the language in this. So we won't look at any more together, but I would like you, for your homework this week, to find out more about Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare. They are really the two most famous English authors. I'm going to give you a link to a PDF of Shakespeare summaries of plays, or you can Google any of the plays that you want to read or any of the books and find them on PDF online. Or you can watch some summaries or parts of books or plays on YouTube, like we did in the lesson. If you look on YouTube and Google one of Shakespeare plays or one of Dickens books, you can see more like that nice animated Charles Dickens Christmas Carol or the beginning of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I hope you've had a little introduction to two of the most famous English authors today and their literature. Please read and find out a bit more for homework, and you can post it in the WhatsApp group. Okay, that's it for today.